I'm joined by Scott Billeck of the Winnipeg Sun, covers the Winnipeg Jets. We've been watching these teams all year. The interesting wrinkle for the Jets is this late season swoon. They hadn't been on a bad jag until the end of this season. What's going on?
Yeah, partly injuries, partly so Nikolai Ehlers went down, at the time leading goal scorer, and just kind of their catalyst for offense in terms of zone exits, zone entries, all that good stuff that they have, and then just he worked very well on the power play, and one of the reasons why the Jets' second unit power play, and the reason kind of why the Jets were in the top five in the power play for much of the regular season. So, him going down, Adam Lowry was also injured for a while. More of it was the fact that here's a team that came out and finally admitted after that 6-1 loss to the Oilers a couple weeks back and said, we've been kind of just getting by on, well, we've made mistakes, but, we'd outscore them or we'd battle enough to, grind out a win. Paul Stastny, who was a veteran in this league, just played his 1,000th game. He, basically said, we've been kind of just flying by the seat of our pants for the last 10, 15, even 20 games, he said. And, that was in the midst of their 7-game run of losses. And it kind of, had forced them to kind of look in the mirror and look at kind of, where they're at. And where they're at was just, huge defensive holes. Offense had been drying up. Connor Hellebuyck hadn't been playing to his kind of Vezina, form. And so, it was kind of a confluence of issues that just kind of arose, after their road trip, where they end a road trip beating Toronto 5-3 in a pretty good game. Obviously Austin Matthews wasn't in that game, but they came out and kind of took it to Toronto, get off that road trip, going 4-1-0 on it, and then come back and start to lose 7 straight. It's been quite the limp in. You don't, if you're a team, you don't want to be kind of losing going into the playoffs. Paul Maurice has been selling a bill of goods here, saying, this is going to make the team better. At least they're going through it now and not in a week's time, when they face the Oilers in the playoffs. It's been, quite the struggle for the Jets, who may or may not have found their form back again in that Vancouver game. Their top line was really going. Blake Wheeler, especially, 2 goals, 4-point night. So, it was kind of a bit of I suppose, a stepping stone that game. But as we saw when they beat Calgary earlier to end the streak, they went back again their following game and lost to Ottawa. And the same sort of mistakes started to kind of rear their head again. It's far from ideal heading into the postseason.
Well, we're talking about a Jets team that's, it's a veteran team. The core group of forwards are the same from that playoff run from 3 years ago when they faced Vegas in the conference final. So, they have the experience. These are hockey players, and we can't expect teams to win every single game. I mean, even Connor McDavid loses a game once in a while, believe it or not. As you and I know, and I think most people know, sports, half of it's mental, at least. And that's what we're talking about here, getting focused. And, obviously there's injuries and whatnot, like you've mentioned. You can't help but talk about comparisons here with the Oilers too.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about the forward core. I mean, heading into the season and, even all season long, I mean, the Jets, compared to the Oilers, they have more depth. They have 2-3 lines that are scoring threats, whereas the Oilers rely on McDavid and Draisaitl a lot for their offense. And I would expect to see that come out in the playoffs when the stakes get raised higher.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the biggest thing for the Jets is, one, they need Nikolai Ehlers back for game 1. Whether or not that's, the team has said that's obviously on track right now. Suspected shoulder injury, a lot of speculation that it was a separated shoulder. As soon as he's good to go, he'll be ready to play again. Will that be in time for game 1? That's another story. I mean, they've said that he will. He's on track for it. He's skated a little bit. No contact yet. No shooting yet. That's going to be a big thing. It really affects their depth at that point. But one of the things it does, it really affects their, just ability to move the puck. And against the Oilers, and we've seen it this season. If the Jets aren't moving the puck, if they're just kind of sitting there watching McDavid do his thing, and it's incredible to watch. They're getting beat, and they're getting beat by McDavid. They're getting beat by Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins. I mean, and then Mike Smith has been just stellar against the Jets, and kind of playing like the Mike Smith from his run to the Western Final with Arizona several years ago, and so. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, on paper, the Jets team is it's a good depth team. They have a good fourth line. They can grind out teams. They can even out the minutes. They don't have to rely necessarily on one line. But what they need to be able to do more than anything is use their depth to figure out a way to slow down Connor McDavid. And that's going to be the biggest hurdle in this series. And for anybody that plays Edmonton going forward, they need to get the body on him. And I know this guy is slippery as they come. Maybe the slipperiest guy in the NHL. He's hard to defend, obviously. I mean, I don't know if you would agree, but I find that when McDavid gets hit or even Draisaitl gets hit, it kind of throws him on the game. It's the same thing with Austin Matthews in my mind. You kind of get to them, kind of get in their kitchen, in their wheelhouse, or whatever you want to call it. That's kind of the recipe that the Jets need to do. And they have to stop the odd man rushes. I mean, you can't let Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl lead a 2-on-1. It's lethal every time, or at least most of the time. And the Jets found that out in one of their losses this year. They lost late in the game, allowing Connor McDavid to come down on a 2-on-1 earlier in the season. He fires it over to Draisaitl. Draisaitl one-times it, and Connor Hellebuyck can't get across. And, that's devastating. You can't, if that happens in the playoffs, that could mean the difference between a 3-1 series and a 2-2 series, right? So, you're not going to get rid of McDavid altogether. He's going to have his chances, but you have to limit them, and that's the biggest thing.
I mean, when it comes to, success limiting McDavid, the Montreal Canadiens arguably had the most success against the Oilers. They had a winning record against them. And the Vancouver Canucks at times also, managed to, stop McDavid in at least a couple of games this season. So Paul Maurice and everybody else on the coaching staff has probably already watched all that tape. And that kind of will dovetail into the defense. I mean, you're talking about preventing 2-on rushes, and we're talking about turnovers. And when I think about the Jets and the Oilers defenses, that's where the I think that's where the equalizers are going to come in, because they're very similar. There's turnovers. As far as trying to limit turnovers in the playoffs, when it comes to, a pair of defenses that are, I'll say, relatively inexperienced. And I think about a Jets defense that had a big turnover, the exodus a couple of years ago of some, very key defensemen on the Jets. And, here we are year 2, and how does the Jets defense look? Players change all the time.
Yeah.
But, you tell me how the Jets defense is doing.
Well, it's interesting because they're still trying to figure out who's going to be their kind of sixth defenseman for the playoffs, right? So that kind of is a bit telling in and of itself. In 2017-18, when the Jets went to the Western Conference Final, they knew who their top 6 were, and they played. And it was a hard-nosed, physical back end. Jacob Trouba, Ben Sherratt, Tyler Myers, as Oilers fans will know well from having played Vancouver now for the last couple of years since Tyler Myers left. But it was just it was a big defense, and it was able to kind of grind out other teams. They played a heavy game, and I know it's a cliche to use that heavy game, but that's the way the Jets played, and that's kind of what helped propel them against Nashville, especially, right? This feels like forever ago now because of the pandemic, but last season is when that exodus happened. Dustin Byfuglien kind of essentially quit hockey, and he did quit hockey, not even essentially. And the Jets, due to free agency, lost Ben Sherratt, lost Tyler Myers, and had to trade Jacob Trouba because he wanted out. You lost your whole right side of your defense. And last season, they plugged holes off the waiver wire. They had guys like Anthony Bitetto, Lucas Sabidza, like guys that if you think of playoff success, those aren't the guys that you're going to want on your team. Neil Pionk has been a revelation for the Jets. That he was the return in the Jacob Trouba trade along with Ville Heinola. At the time, you're trading Jacob Trouba, who, 50-point guy, is set to make $8 million a year, roughly around that. That's what kind of the thing was back then, and just a great partner for Josh Morrissey, who's the team's top defenseman on the top pairing here still. And you lose that and everything else that you lost. Josh Morrissey is once now thrust into a top guy role where, that was Dustin Byfuglien's job, kind of prior to that. Like Dustin Byfuglien, he played on the second pairing, but was, the guy still. So Josh Morrissey is now leading a team of, guys that are mostly younger than him, smaller than, or roughly around the same size. Like the Jets lost all their size last year. I mean, they tried to plug those holes, but even this year now. Now they have Logan Stanley. He's likely. It seems. It's interesting because we don't know what the final top six will look like, but it seems like 6'7" Logan Stanley will be in that. He's been a bit of a I don't want miracle's probably too strong of a word, but to see him kind of blossom this year has been huge for the Jets. Here's a big dude on the back end that gets pucks to the net, kind of creates offense, which is something this team has lacked, entirely since Dustin Byfuglien left. It's interesting because they don't have the size anymore. They tried this thing this season where they played a small defenseman with a bigger guy. But those bigger guys aren't, other than Logan Stanley, and the only reason Logan Stanley was playing is because of an injury to Nathan Beaulieu. So, Logan Stanley brings some of that physicality, but nobody else was really big. I mean, Neil Pionk, who doesn't stand any taller than, in my mind, 5'10". I know he probably says 6 feet on the NHL site, but I'm 6'1", and I've stand beside him, and he's shorter than I am. And so he was the guy at one point was up leading the Jets in hits this season, and he's your kind of diminutive kind of blue liner, and so it's interesting to see guys have stepped up and tried to play that physical game, but it's just there's a lot of inexperience, right? I mean, you're talking about Logan Stanley playing roughly 20 games now, I think, close to it. He's going to be in your lineup. You have Ville Heinola, who could also be in your lineup. He's played about 5 games now this season. 20 years old, a smaller defenseman, but one of their best puck moving defenseman, who's not playing at the moment. And you're going to play Jordy Ben likely. Jordy Ben, as Oilers fans will know from the Vancouver Canucks. He's kind of the guy, more the Swiss Army knife sort of guy, can play left side, right side, veteran, which is, what Paul Maurice likes. But then you're dealing, you got a guy like Derek Forward who's struggled down the stretch here, kind of, just looks labored, tired even. And then they've kind of flip-flopped on whether Tucker Poolman's going to be in the lineup. So I don't want to say it's in disarray. It's a huge question mark, right? I mean, I think that's the best way to put it. They just don't know what they're going to get out of it. And, unless Connor Hellebuyck can be otherworldly, and we know he can be, but we also know he hasn't, in the playoffs at least, stolen a series. So there's a question mark there as well. But, this defense, and it's not just the 2 guys on the blue line. The 3 guys up front also have to play that defensive role, and that's something that they've kind of adjusted to this season, to varying effects. But it hasn't been smooth. It hasn't been an easy transition, and they saw during this this extended kind of losing season for them, or streak for them, sorry, that. It's going to be this is what they'll live or die by. If they can figure out the defensive game, they have a shot, I think, because they have so much depth up front and have a world-class goaltender between the pipes. But if they can't figure out the team defense, it could be a very short series for the Jets.
Yeah, you brought it up, tying it all together, both forwards and defense, is the goaltending.
Yeah,
we talked about Hellebuyck. You said it already. I mean, he hasn't stolen a series for the Jets. Thinking 3 years ago, and certainly not the last 2 years when they both were out in the first round of play.
Yeah.
And that's this series could very well come down to goaltending, as it should, because goaltending is the X factor in the playoffs. Yeah. And whether it's football or whether it's hockey, defense does help you win championships. You can have all the firepower up front you want. But unless you have a Connor Hellebuyck, Vezina Trophy winner last year,
yeah,
and here in Edmonton we have a Mike Smith resurgent out of the ashes, has had a fantastic season.
Yeah,
both teams need to have trust in their goalie to cover up some mistakes,
Yes.
particularly when you're dealing with the defenses that are not as experienced as other teams.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I've like to said and written over the past couple seasons is Connor Hellebuyck is the guy who covers a multitude of sins, because often they would, especially last year. I mean, there was a game last year in Las Vegas, in San Jose, and Connor Hellebuyck faced 52 shots and stopped 51 of them, and the Jets won. And like that, it was a shelling. And Connor Hellebuyck, and that's sort of the Connor Hellebuyck that the Jets are going to need. I'm not saying he's going to face 51 shots or 52 shots every night, but the point is, like, this guy needs to take this serious. In 2018, a large part of the reason why they got through Nashville was because Pekka Rinne, who ended up winning the Vezina that year, didn't play so well in the playoffs. He was pulled in Game 7 of that game because it was just, I think partly due just a panic button on the part of Peter Laviolette to try and just get that team going at the time. Connor Hellebuyck didn't do that, and then when it got to the Western Final against Vegas, it was Marc-Andre Fleury who put up a .955 against the Jets in the series and stole that series from the Jets. Here was the Jets. Mark Scheifele was having an insane playoffs, set an NHL record for road points. They just couldn't score on them. The Jets won the first game in that, and then they just couldn't. They lost 4 straight after that, losing in 5. And Connor Hellebuyck, just couldn't do it. And he's vowed ever since then. And even after last year's kind of, I don't know how much stock I put into last year's playoffs. It was a very weird, situation. I think the Jets would have done better in their first round series, having played the playoff style that they were playing down the stretch before the season was halted. Everybody having 3 or 4 or 5 months off, whatever it ended up being in the end, I don't think helped, some of the teams that were really getting into kind of their playoff rhythm going in, because they just lost that. A lot of it just was skill, raw skill, and you saw Tampa Bay Lightning win that playoffs. Everything is going to ride on Connor Hellebuyck. Essentially he hasn't shown up to take that series, to do his best, and he's vowed to do that at some point. And the Jets will need that this year, because they just don't have, they can't rely on team defense for 60 minutes every night. Is he his rhythm? Jets fans will certainly hope so. And that'd be huge. I mean, here's the thing. If Connor Hellebuyck isn't swimming around, if he's not moving a whole lot, that's when he's at his dangerous, because then he's just being big and boring, and that's where this guy is, so good, because he doesn't have to move a lot. He's positionally sound. He's controlling rebounds, which is often sometimes one of his knocks against him, but then when he's playing well, he's controlling rebounds, the direction of them, all that kind of stuff. And then he'll make the odd, 10 beller, and that will kind of be the difference in a game. Connor Hellebuyck is going to have to make that 1 or 2 save against a Draisaitl, a McDavid, whoever it might be, every night in each of these series and beyond. If they can scratch out a win in this series, he's going to have to be at their best. He'll be the guy at the playoffs. If the Jets were to go on some miracle run and win the Stanley Cup, it'll be because Connor Hellebuyck is the Conn Smythe winner by a large, large margin.